if we think back to our childhood, which is really conception to about 25, I mean, truly, our brain doesn't even finish forming until between 25 and 27. So all of our programming happens until that point. Most of our trauma, most of our challenges came from uncertainty, came from thinking we were safe, thinking we were loved, thinking we belonged, thinking we were liked, and then boom, something happened. The rug came out from underneath us, and all of a sudden we realized, oh my gosh, I'm not safe, or I'm not loved, or I'm not liked, or I don't belong. And we begin to have a relationship or create a connection between uncertainty and trauma, or uncertainty and pain, or uncertainty and like bracing ourselves. So in our adult life, when uncertainty comes, what ends up getting triggered subconsciously is a very young part of us that's like, what's going to happen? I'm bracing myself for something either kind of bad or really bad. And again, this is all happening subconsciously. So that's why we're so graspy, is because we're trying to protect a part of us. It's like danger, 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 alert, 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 uncertainty. And when that gets triggered, when that need to know and that need for control gets triggered, it's the twofold, the spiritual conversation of like really, really surrendering and knowing that the universe has our back, but also the more practical work of going inside and going, okay, like what do I really need right now? Because we think we may need, figuring out a way we're going to pay our water bill, right? Which is like the practical need that we're going to try to control. But what we might really need is to go inside and tell ourselves, everything's okay. Everything's really going to be okay. And I got you. We more need that emotional reassurance that often wasn't there in childhood when something happened. So for me, understanding that when I'm in uncertainty, when I'm in that feeling of I don't have control and I want to be hypervigilant and I want to figure it out, there's probably a younger part of me that's driving a lot of that fear, because she's like, we got to get control here so that something bad doesn't happen. And when we know that, we can remind ourselves, okay, like if the worst thing happened, then what? So that's another really useful tool, is to go, let me just play my worst case scenario all the way out. I can't pay my bill, then what? And then you fill in the blank. Okay, and then what? And you get sort of all the way to the bottom of like what the worst possible thing that could happen. And then you go, okay, and then what would I do? Like, would I die? Like, would I be okay? And when we can actually take ourselves there without panic, but really like think about how we would greet each thing, then we're actually tapping into the more like mature parent part of ourselves versus letting the scared inner child drive the show. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It makes perfect sense. It reminds me of an exercise that I first heard Tim Ferriss talk about. I don't know if it's his exercise, but he definitely did a TED talk on it. The exercise is called fear setting, where what he invites you to do is to write down all your fears, and then write down what's the worst that can happen, right? And then he takes one step further and says, all right, let's say the worst happens. What can you do about it, right? And as you write that exercise, what I find for me, and I do versions of it, whenever I am concerned about something, I don't think I operate or get concerned so much about fear anymore, because I think I have a different relationship with it. But if I do, I would do a version of this exercise, because usually once you write down, or when I write down, and I would invite anybody listening to consider this, is once you write down, hey, this is what I can do about it, often you realize you can do something about it.
Right.
And it kind of takes away the fear, because you're like, oh, I can do this about it, or I can do that about it, or I can't do anything about it, but it's not that bad. Like it's kind of like you're kind of you're rationalizing something that's so irrational,
right,
that it almost takes the control off the irrationality to it.
Well, you're also in a different part of your brain.
Yeah.
So often when we're having when we're basically hijacked by our subconscious and we're in more of those like inner child fears, because most of our fears got programmed a long time ago and we just keep recreating them and reliving them and re-experiencing them. We're not in our prefrontal cortex. We're not in the part of our brain that's solution oriented. We're not in a regulated nervous system.
You're not, yeah.
So to get ourselves out of this dysregulated nervous system and out of the more like flight, freeze, or fawn response, and fawn really isn't a nervous system response, it's more of an adaptive strategy, but you know what I mean? And when we get ourselves out of more of the trauma brain, then it's like, oh, I can deal with it. But the issue is we don't even realize we're dysregulated.
Yeah.
We don't even realize we're not in the part of our brain that is solution orientated and that can regulate ourselves, because I think so many of us walk around dysregulated most of the time, and because we're so used to it, we don't even realize it. So that exercise is really useful, because what it does is it gets us out of the fear-driven, really activated part of our brain where we're more emotional, where we're hijacked by our past and don't even realize it, and puts us into the part of our brain that can regulate our nervous system and actually come up with solutions.
Beautifully put. There's other ways that I found very useful when we are in that, it's just a narrative that we keep telling ourselves. And what I find is very often, once I get into the narrative, then I'm in that narrative until I'm able to like stop and pause. And
Right.
if I can cause a pause, most likely I can come out of that narrative. So what I found is sleeping is tremendously helpful for it. It's like, if you can, again, sometimes the narrative is so strong that you cannot go to sleep.
Right.
But if you can go to sleep, if you go to sleep, next day everything's just better, because you wake up with a more relaxed mind, and then suddenly the power kind of poof goes away, or it doesn't seem like a problem as much. What I found is a question that we ask people to do in our programs is to always ask, is this an empowered thought or a disempowered thought? If it's a disempowered thought, let's see if there's an empowered thought that's available for us. Because once we switch from, oh, this is a disempowered thought, it's not really helping me in any way,
Yeah.
I can now switch to a thought that might be helpful and see what happens if I choose that thought. And once we've made that choice, again, you're out of that narrative that's just constantly going, instead of that, you're like, all right, let's shift the narrative. Oh, there's a different way of looking at it. And you can switch it all around.